Welcome everybody, you're watching Mr. Fugu Data Science. Today, I'm interested in doing a download and install of MongoDB on a Mac without using Homebrew. We're going to have 3 steps here. The download and installation of the Mongo daemon connecting to the server. Next, the download and installation of Mongo shell. And finally, any hurdles or hiccups you may encounter while doing an installation of both of these. In Google, our trusty old friend, type MongoDB. In the search terms, you're going to see this MongoDB website. You click it, go to Products, Community Edition. The green button here, Download Community. Scroll down. Currently, the version is 8.0.6. I'm running Apple Silicon. You may need to change this depending on your needs. And this is a tarball file. Download this file. I want to mention this. You may encounter this page right here. Here's the connection path on the MongoDB website as of April 2025. It's in the Home Documents, Database Manual, Self-Managed Deployments, Installation, Community Edition, Install on macOS. This page right here. Here's the connection path on the MongoDB website as of April 2025 to use Homebrew. I'm illustrating this today. My video is going to be slightly different than what you will see in other videos because of the last 2 portions of the video. First thing we want to do, you can use this command to unzip the file in the terminal. Otherwise, go to your download section, double click it, and it will automatically unzip the file. When you're in the terminal, you can just print the working directory you're currently in and take the file that's in the downloads, such as this, which is in the your username and downloads. When I run this command for the current file, yours may have a different extension at the end depending on when you see this video. These are the files that were unzipped when I performed this operation. Here's the files that are within the folder that we unzipped. This bin file is of particular importance to us. Let's see what's inside of that. This Mongo S is for sharding. This Mongo D for the daemon is what connects to the server. This is the first thing that we're very interested in so we can make our connection. We need to move this folder to a location where we want to store everything. You can do this in 2 commands. You could do the copy command and save the file or the folder with everything stored just in case you make a mistake. But in this case, it's unnecessary because you still have an active copy of the zip file stored in your system here. So even if you move this and make mistakes, you could re-unzip this and it's not a big deal. So we move the file from the downloads with the file name to our destination of your user folder, and then your username here, let you type. And you can now move this whole folder with all of its contents. After you move the file, go into your working directory, such as mine is the home directory where I'm going to store everything. I erased the above command because I already have the file there. Now that we're in the active directory that we want to use, we need the binaries for this file to make connections. And we needed to set up the variables so that they're found so we can make the link to connect to the servers. In order to do this, let's do this real quick. Here's the file that we're working with currently, the one that's highlighted in blue. We need to connect the bin folder here to either the bash shell or the ZSHRC file. That file should be stored in your home directory. We can do this command. This is the folder that I'm currently talking about, and I have read and write privileges. If you have issues with your privileges for whatever device you're on or that you're signed into, you may need to do a sudo command to open up the privileges for you to continue your work. If you do not have this file, you can do a simple operation of touch.zshrc to create this file. It's not a problem. Let me clean this up. Use whatever text editor you want. I'm using Vim because it's just a natural one inside of a macOS. And I'm opening this file or the file you may have just created. This is where we want to store this particular variable in our path. Export path with capital PATH and then the path of where you store the Mongo download folder, and you want the bin folder inside of that, which houses the Mongo S, Mongo D, and then another variable that you may set up later if you install the GUI. This is what you want to type out with whatever username or location you're using. It doesn't need to be stored in the users folder. It can be stored in the usr/local/bin folder or wherever you want that makes sense for you. Just be consistent. Also, this naming convention you can see for designating your path, you may see different scripting for this when you're looking online, so don't be confused. It's just a different notation. After you create this path, if you're setting up the same way as me, make sure you use the quotations, please. If you're using Vim, you need to press I, which will allow you to insert any commands, and you just scroll down to whatever you want and type this in or cut and paste. All the code will be on my GitHub, and there will be a link in the description and the comment section below as well. When you're finished making your insert or any corrections, press the escape key, then you will press :WQ. So you're saving and quitting. For me, I'm only pressing Q because this file is already there for me. But now you need to run a separate command, which would be source.shrc. This will update the information in the terminal to the command you just performed for this file after you saved it. It's doing an update. Otherwise, if you want to, you could restart the terminal, but it's unnecessary if you run this command. If you went to run MongoDB now, you're going to have a slight error, and let me show you what pops up. I have a screenshot. You'll get something like this in the garbled mess of junk. You don't have this DB path set up, and there's a folder that you need to do to create a connection for this path to connect. This is a screenshot from me doing this earlier for brevity. What we need to do next is create a directory to store the data for MongoDB to put everything. Because if you don't have that, you're going to get an error message and not understand why. So make sure you're in the correct directory when you put this file. If you're storing it in the users folder like this, then you want to create the folder in that location. You could do it in one step with sudo make directory mkdir and then -p and then data/d. You don't have to do this in 2 steps. You could do it all at once and it'll create it for you for the correct file path. Since it's a sudo command, just put the password that you have for your device that you logged in with, and then you need to create the path so that Mongo daemon knows where to store everything. So it's basically you create the folder and then you're calling the Mongo daemon that connects to the server and giving it the information to store all of the data. It's creating that link. And if everything goes right, you should get a connection. If you get some errors, I'll go over that at the end. The next thing that we need to do is create a path for the log reports. When MongoDB starts up the server, it'll do a lot of checks to make sure that everything's working properly. And you would like to create a folder to store these log reports. You can also suppress the output and just store everything behind the scenes if you want. So make this directory in the same location that you are storing everything else for MongoDB setup. You can create a nested folder to create these journal logs as well. You could do that separately inside of the data folder if you would like. That's a separate option. And store it in a log report such as this. You just need to make that your paths are correct. And when I was setting this up, there was an exit path of 100. And that's one of the errors that's incorrect because the DB path wasn't specified correctly, allowing MongoDB knowing where to connect the data folders. So you need to reset the terminal and update it with the correct path, because this is the error that you're going to get if you don't do it correctly. And all you need to do is tell MongoDB where you're sending this data. Calling this correctly and being in the correct location when you're calling this is also the issue. Make sure that your file path is pointing to this initially before you run this command. For example, if you're storing this in the users folders, make sure you're in this correct path first before you run this command, otherwise it won't connect properly. Let's go back again. When you cd into the data folder, you could run this command finally after you make that connection. And you're connecting this path so MongoDB knows where to store all of your information. You'll be asked to run your password. And looking through all this jumbled mess, you'll finally see that it's connecting to a port and to the path lets you set up correctly, which is awesome because now you're in business. And if you look at the bottom, it's going to have the same thing where your data file attributes are getting stored in this DB path with your information. If we go into Google and do Mongo sh download or Mongo shell download, so the Mongo D is used to connect to the server. In order for us to connect to a client, we need the Mongo shell or a GUI that can help us incorporate this. Connecting to the server alone will allow us to create databases and run operations solely, but that's not letting us connect to any ports for a different website or any hosting or anything like that, which is different. So some of the distinctions are this. Mongo shell interacts with the client. You first start the Mongo daemon. Mongosh is used for sharding, and it's an intermediary, and we won't talk about that today. The default port when you connect to the server is 27017, and any data that's being stored from MongoDB will be called to this folder, and any log reports will go to your logs folder. Mongosh had a deprecated term a few years ago that you used to call Mongo, if it's been a while or if you didn't know this. And this shell will interact with the Mongo server daemon, allowing you to facilitate activities with the client. This is the shell download, which is different than what we just did. Currently, as of April of 2025, it's version 2.50. Here's for the Apple Silicon, and it's a zip file. And you download this file. You can double click it in the downloads folder, or you could run a command to unzip this folder just like this. Just unzip and then the file name in the terminal. So we're going to do that right now. After you cd into the terminal for the downloads folder, unzip this file. Otherwise, click the GUI interface and just double click the folder. These are the contents that are inside of the extracted folder, allowing us to connect the Mongo shell. Next, we need to move this into the location we're going to store everything. Then we need to move this folder with all of its contents to the location we want it as a destination, such as the user and then your users and your username, or wherever you're going to store it. We need to go through the same process of storing variable for our path, which if you're either using bash or the Z shell. In my case, I'm using Z shell. And I will use vim once again, and I will need to create this path that I want to export. It's in the same location. You just paste in the Mongo shell folder name. And if you're reading this in a different point in time, you just change this version number or path reference that you're going to store this in. Like I said before, if you're using vim, you need to press I for insert and scroll down and put this path reference. And when you're finished, you push escape, then the colon, and then W for write, and Q to quit. Since I already have this, I'm going to quit out. Next, you need to run source, and then the file name once again to update the system in the terminal. But I need to mention something very important. Like before, if you're not in the correct path name when you're trying to set this up, you're going to have an issue with the updates for everything to work. For example, I made sure I was in the bin folder for this Mongo shell when I did it, because I ran it before in the regular user directory for my home directory, and it wasn't connecting. And then I had to figure out and update again to understand why. So I cd'd into the folder, then I went into the bin folder, and then I said, all right, there's the Mongo shell I'm looking for. So I went back one folder, made sure that I had this correct, because in the vim folder, you'll notice the path has a reference for being in the bin. So when I want to do the updating, I need to also be in the same folder. And when I called, finally, of being in the right folder path, Mongo shell, it connected me to the server. And you'll be given a log ID. This log ID could be very useful because you can call it with specific commands and get your log reports printed out on the screen. You'll be greeted with this delightful thing knowing you're within MongoDB. These are your test DBs by default through Mongo. You'll see that it's bound to the specific IP address that is the default Mongo address. If you have a proxy server someplace you're calling, you could import your information here. And I ran the DB server command line ops command, and it showed me where the path of the daemon is, which was correct, and the file path of where your information is stored, and this 𝐀=1. Be careful when you're shutting down this server and do it correctly. You'll see like Control-C, or you'll see the use of kill. There's circumstances where you could lose data or things won't be saved, so just be careful when you're doing proper exiting. And I just did the shutdown of DB shutdown server, and you could put parameters inside of the parentheses, specify a time or other characteristics that you should investigate on your own accord. But that'll be the end of this video. The last thing I want to go over is some troubleshooting when you're doing these installs. Mongo shell. If you get a message saying Z shell command not found Mongosh, recheck that the Mongosh file is within your path, such as the .zshrc file. and recheck that in your editor. Update the terminal with source.zshrc. Go to the path where you stored this and make sure it matches this file. Next, check the contents of the folder where you stored the Mongo shell. Sometimes an operation can cause this file of Mongo shell to be deleted depending on what you're doing. If this is the case, then what you need to do is possibly remove this folder and delete everything with the command rm-rf and then the file path of where that folder is. You need to always have the Mongo daemon started before you ever run Mongo shell. That's the first thing you need to pay attention to. Next, some systems you may need to go in system preferences and do an update to allow MongoDB to operate. Also, if you are having issues persist, consider using sudo for your commands and enter your password when you're moving the file or you're trying to do any updates to override the permissions. If you have issues installing MongoD, for instance, this specific command here, creating the file path for MongoD to read and store your data, use the sudo command. Also, make sure you're in the correct file path when you're doing this installation and running this command. Do not go in the regular default position of the user/username because you can get an error and it won't work. Also, make sure you have the correct information when you're exporting the path for the .zshrc file, such as the one above. If you come into this specific error, z shell command not found MongoD, then do a source.zshrc after you update that file to update the terminal. You may need to go in your system preferences to allow MongoDB to have permission. Next, check the bin folder within MongoDB to make sure that you have MongoD, MongoS, and install Compass available. If you get a shutdown code of exit 100, this means that you need to create the data/db folder. If that folder is created, you need to then make sure that you're linking this folder to your path. But if you're in the terminal doing this, first get into this file path before you make this command. Next, you may see this in there. Create the missing directory or specify another path for this command, or add it to a config file to store the information. It's referencing this. This is the path that you need to get if you have this already created. If this is not created, you may just get this path because it doesn't know where to output your data. I have a lot of links in the description. Put a lot of time into this. I hope it's somewhat coherent. But thanks for watching. Please feel free to like, share, and subscribe. And if you subscribe, turn on that notification bell. If you'd like to help support the channel, it'd be greatly appreciated. I have a Buy Me a Coffee link. If available, consider a super thanks or a channel membership in the future. Always leave comments in the comments section below to help others and enlighten me with things I may have missed, interpreted incorrectly, or you think would be beneficial and useful. Thank you so much. See you in the next video. Bye.